firstly, thanks so much for having me. As was mentioned by Kat, Richard and I had written a paper about the work that we're doing in the women's game at the minute. So top of the presentation is, are you listening? Fan activism in the women's game. So just a brief introduction from me. My name's Deborah Dilworth. I'm the EFL and Women's Game Network Manager for the Football Supporters Association. The Football Supporters Association is the national democratic representative body for football supporters in England and Wales, and we're the leading advocates for supporter ownership, diversity, better stewarding and policing, protecting fan rights, and just completely trying to raise supporter representation across the game. We work with a lot of different stakeholders, which includes all the leagues, the government, and the safety advisory groups. And I've just put a few links down at the bottom just in case anybody wants to follow some of our work or join as members. So I thought I'd start this presentation just to give a bit of perspective, which I think a lot of people probably on this call will know anyway. But for anybody that I think is a Girls Aloud fan, we're talking about a whole lot of history here. The supporters have always been a part of the women's game. It's just they've been squashed and it's sort of a forgotten piece of history, that there were actually a lot of spectators that really were interested in women's football. So I just pulled some stats from a book called Women on the Ball by Sue Lopez, which just before the ban in 1921, lots of games were being played all over Britain, and there was a lot of spectators, so just under 1 million spectators and about 150 teams. This to me is really important when we look at current fan activism, so to really respect and understand the history behind supporters in the women's game. And Sue notes in the book that at one point the crowds were much larger than the crowds that were attending the men's game. Just before the ban as well, so on Boxing Day, this is a statistic that has been mentioned a lot during growing media on the women's game. 67,000 people turned up to Goodison on Boxing Day to watch a women's cup final, and 14,000 supporters were turned away, so they couldn't get in. And again, I just think it's a really important point to try to frame the fan activism that's happening at the minute, and also to just do a nod towards the people that were supporting the women's game originally. The FA have just recently announced their growth in numbers for spectators across the game as well, participation, refereeing, coaching, and the fan base. So as we'll have seen across last season, there was some record-breaking crowds that were happening in the women's game across the domestic league and also internationally. So for those of you that were there, the 77,000 at Wembley was a really special moment, I think, for the game. It was incredible to hear that many fans, cheering and chanting for the team. So again, we can sort of see the growth in numbers, but how important supporters are, and also that they are there, and that there is a lot of support for the women's game. Just at the bottom of this as well, there was a huge growth across the Women's World Cup last year in terms of viewing figures, and domestically a growth too. So I'm just trying to frame the context for what we're working in now. So in terms of the FSA, originally we didn't really do much work within the women's game, and so last year I decided, because of the World Cup that was happening, I desperately wanted to try to encourage appetite and support for the women's game, and also supporting the supporters. So I pitched to the senior executives of the FSA, and I said, please let me go out to the World Cup. We can really make a difference to supporters out there. We can support them, and we can help build a conversation in terms of the domestic networks. And so we went out to France. We talked to absolutely loads of people, and we witnessed a real appetite for supporters to be helping themselves create a voice domestically as well as internationally. So just wanted to share a video, which fingers crossed, I hope will help, just showing you a few headline stats from our perspective from the Fans Embassy work.
Have you ever felt?
Are you listening?
Damn. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And apologies, I know it says 2021 in the end of that video, but that was done last year, so sadly the tournament's been moved back. But anybody that wants to follow that work and feel like part of the community for the international tournaments, please do follow us at Free Lionesses. Okay, so in terms of the domestic work that we've been doing, this time last year we had 0 members. So we as soon as I came back from the World Cup, it was setting about trying to link back with the people that I'd talked to over in France and try to support them in either developing the supporters groups that they already had running or to create new supporters groups. So we fast forward to this year, so July, August this year, we've got 18 members. I think that's just actually about to tick over to 20 by the end of this week. So it really has grown, and it really does show an appetite for the women's game and fan activism within the women's game. So my role as a network manager is threefold really. I offer training, support, and a chance to work with volunteers so that they can upskill their abilities in organising community projects, in making sure that they have they put a professional foot forwards in order to liaise with the club. And to work with them to build a local and national voice. So my job really is a sounding board, and it's the support. I don't want to take over the local conversations of the supporters groups, but I do want to pull them together to have a collaborative approach for problems that they're experiencing. So in terms of the work as well, we sort of work across 3 different lines at the minute. Increasing the size of the network, pushing for our network to be formally constituted in the FSA, because at this moment in time it's not. Externally, we're trying to build relationships with the FA, the SGSA and other stakeholders to include fan voices within their decisions, because it's fundamental to every decision that they make. It affects the fans. And then we luckily held a meeting with the FA, the first meeting for the Women's Game Network in early July. So that was just to sort of talk through how supporters might transition back into stadiums, how things look behind closed doors, how supporters could be fully involved in both those things. And really, we've been watching, or I've been lucky enough to watch our fans groups be really active in their communities. You know, during the pandemic, they have worked tirelessly to create still a community bond for their members, to do fundraising, to raise money for the NHS, to do social media still, even though there's no games, to sort of pin those things on. So I know they've spent a lot of time and energy in trying to grow this network with me, and also to grow their own fan bases. So there's some incredible work being done. So just to give you a rough idea, these are some of the supporters groups that we actually have involved at the minute. You know, the likes of Nottingham Forest, Everton, Liverpool, Huddersfield, Leicester. It's an incredible group so far, and we do cover all leagues. So it's really important for me to make sure that everybody feels like they have a say, have a voice, and could create a supporters group if they wanted to. I just wanted to move on quickly to some of the supporters issues that they're sort of experiencing at the minute. So I won't read through every single one, but these are just some of the issues that are being faced, and this is why it's so important to have a national voice as well as a local voice. Some of the issues are being experienced across the board by these women's groups, and to add more voices together hopefully means a stronger pushback on some of these things. So the likes of game clashes with men's fixtures is a real frustration for our supporters groups just before the pandemic happened. And also just communication out from the clubs and the leagues to supporters. Sometimes it feels as if they're being missed out, and that can be really, really difficult. Partly we have to understand that, you know, the women's clubs are running under resourced sometimes, and that can be a real difficulty on the club side. but the FSA realistically are here to support clubs and supporters in getting a better relationship between each other. So what's my plan, my grand plan? So it started with the Women's World Cup, and going forwards, my idea is to create and sustain voice for supporters within the women's game at every level. They're one of the main stakeholders, and they completely and utterly deserve to have a say in how their club runs. So that could be from match day to financials. Clubs are community assets, and supporters are the lifeblood of the game, really. So we need to make sure that they have a say and they have a voice. I think sometimes there's a lack of appreciation for what supporters can offer as well. They have a huge skill set. They're often willing to volunteer for the benefit of their club, often for nothing in return. And I think that that's an important asset for the clubs to be able to tap into. And I really do believe that the clubs and supporters have a golden opportunity to get things right from an infrastructure level to include supporters and supporter say. My aims really, along with the Women's Network group, so at the minute, as we're sort of growing and we're trying to encourage more groups to get involved, it's important to try to offer a level of sustainability to get people involved in different things, different projects that we're doing and at a local level that they're doing. But mainly it's to make sure that supporter voice is increased on every level from an international perspective and a domestic perspective. We along with the FA as well would love to see the fan base grow for women's football. You know, I'm a huge advocate of women's football and it's one of my passions, and I want to make sure that we can help and play our part in assisting the growth of the fan base, whilst encouraging good practice of dialogue between clubs and supporters, so that we get it right from the off. And we also want to showcase some of the fantastic work that's being done by supporters on a match day and non-match day projects that they might be running. So as I mentioned before, clubs are community assets. I heard a story from one of my supporters groups yesterday who said that somebody had been really struggling with their mental health. They approached the supporters group for some company and to come to a game with, and the lady just really enjoyed it and has felt better since. That is a perfect example of how a supporters group can affect their community, as well as the making sure that supporters are represented at the club. So they really are a vital asset in a football club. I just wanted to touch on this quote because we use it a lot within our network management and within some of the comms things that we do at the FSA. But, you know, and I probably, you know, I know that you guys will probably know this as fans anyway, but football really is nothing without fans, and they are the lifeblood of the game. And, you know, I could say that till I'm blue in the face because it is really true. And what they can offer is incredible. So I just felt that this was a really important quote to emphasize what I'm basically trying to say in this presentation. Lastly, I just wanted to do a call to action. So I want people to be part of the conversation. I would love you to join your women's supporters group if you have one local to you, or the club that you support, that supporters group. And if there isn't one at your club, think about setting one up. Think about how that might look. And I will happily help you. I will happily have a conversation with you about potentially sorting one out and understanding what kind of supporters group you want to be. So do you want to be focused on atmosphere or diversity, or do you want to be a general group? There's so many different ways of being a supporters group. So the world's your oyster, really. And I just would love people, more and more clubs, to have supporters groups and have that passion that supporters groups bring. So really, it's me urging you at the end of this presentation to join the FSA in one which way or the other. You can join as an individual member, and we would happily have a conversation with you to discuss any further ideas you might have. And also watch this space, because we're growing from no members to 18 members. We've you know, we're really progressing, and that's down to the hard work of the groups that are already in our network. And then one final point I would love to just mention is we're currently running a women's games supporter survey right now. And I'll pop the link in the box. But I just hope that you guys could maybe fill it in or share it with whoever you might know that goes to women's games. It's an important piece of research for us to understand how people feel about going back into the stadiums. So that was a whistle-stop tour of the FSA Women's Game Network, and I hope it just shows you a bit of what we've been working on. And thank you so much. And any questions?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you. I'm just going to turn my mic on now while you speak.
Okay. So great presentation. It was really interesting, and looking forward to seeing more of what you're doing. This is kind of a little bit more of a comment than a question, but so just from a research perspective, fan groups are kind of one of those groups that usually don't get documented in archives and other kind of histories as well, because they're from the bottom up. They're not usually recorded in the official club minutes and stuff. I'm a librarian that works in web archiving, and we've been curating web collections on like football and soccer especially, and we've got fan groups as well as one of them. So I'm going to put a link into the Twitter, into the chat, to where people can nominate stuff, but it'd be really good to maybe put that out to the clubs that you work with, the supporters group as well, that their history is important, even though they might be just starting out, that like you said, like their contributions to the game is really important. So also documenting that and making sure it's accessible for people in the future to look back on is really important too. So I just wanted to say great presentation, and just add that comment as well.
Oh, thank you. No, that's lovely, and I agree with you. It is important that their history is documented as well. And I think in the men's game, so I look after the EFL as well, and I believe that there is more established links between some clubs and supporters groups, but there's still a long way to go in improving just generally the respect or the communication that happens between some of those clubs. But this is where I think the women's game is an interesting opportunity for us to get the infrastructure right quicker, to make sure that there's support or representation across the board. My trouble is that because we're such a new network, some of the supporters groups are really new, and so my job is to try to get them to have a structure, to get them to have a constitution, to be democratically run, so that in order to put their best foot forward, so that the clubs can see that they're running in a certain way, because there's accountability on both parts really to make sure that you're running in a certain way, and you can't really go and criticize somebody else if you don't have all your ducks in a row. So for me, that is a bit of a challenge, but it's a great one, and some of the volunteers I'm working with at the minute are so passionate. So we need to showcase that and use that and make sure that their history is documented properly. But thank you. I've just popped the survey, by the way, and just some of our Twitter and contact details, because I know sometimes these things are a bit funny where you don't necessarily want to ask a question, but you might want a one-to-one. So I'm more than happy for anybody to drop me a line, and I'll have a separate conversation with them.
Okay, Debs, I'm going to ask Kat, will she tweet your link, what you put onto your survey, and then it just go out far and wide, and then if everyone can keep retweeting it, it's gonna, you're gonna get a lot of people actually responding to that, which will be a really good thing. Mm-hmm. I just sort of had just a question really. Well, it's more a discussion point really than a question. It's around clubs being community assets, and I think that they absolutely are. And I think the point that you made around the mental health and supporters supporting each other, and they do that. You can see with any even the big football clubs, our supporters have supported each other through quite extremely difficult times. You look at Liverpool, the Hillsborough and so forth. And I think that is something that really needs to be developed, with the women's football as well, about, being supportive and inclusive and trying to get, a much wider fan base, bringing people in, mm-hmm. About supporting people to the benefits of the game is in terms like what you said about mental health, getting people out, including people that normally would maybe not be able to get to a game because of disability or whatever.
That's a really important point for us as well, because there's several different areas of the organisation within the FSA. So we have network managers, which covers community ownership, which is Richard's area. We have non-league, Premier League, EFL, but then we also have different arms, one which is called Fans for Diversity. And that's specifically to try to run projects across the board to promote diversity. And then we also have another lady who looks after policing and stewarding. And I think going back to the community asset point of view, often football supporters can be talked about in a derogatory manner, but football supporters, to me, I've witnessed over the course of the pandemic, and our organisation has witnessed this, people fundraising for PPE. Food banks is a massive fan initiative, making sure, working with refugee charities. There's been an abundance of work that has happened within the supporters movement, which sometimes kind of doesn't get into the press or doesn't get known. And our women's groups have been a really good example of that, and a really good example of leaving your colours aside and working together for the good of the game. And it's been fantastic for me to witness. I know there's a couple of people on the call, and Stacey mentioned it actually. She came to sit with us in one of our fans' embassies when she was out at the World Cup, and to see it from where it was, and the fans' embassy, we talked to absolutely, as you'd seen in the stats, we talked to absolutely loads of people. To see where it's growing and where it could go is just so exciting, but it will benefit the communities around those clubs as well. Yeah, they could do so many different projects within a supporters group. It's quite
again, it's just sort of maybe getting the funding to be able to prime some projects or mobilise people, to do this. But where or when that will come from, or if the clubs themselves will be able to support that. I don't know, but there is, and I think with the COVID thing and what we're going to be seeing over the next maybe 12 months even, I think that there is such a big role for those supporters, and the community side of the work of support for the game.
Well, I think as well, my one thing I would say, and I would want people to take away from this presentation, apart from come and talk to us and have a chat and watch what we're doing in the women's game, particularly for supporters, but it's to encourage anybody from a club side to want to strive for a genuine dialogue with their supporters group, and to know that the supporters group, the mission for them really is to be a critical friend. It's not to be not to be a yes body, yes, oh club, you want to do that, because often we get sideswiped into marketing led stuff, and that can cause issues, because often it's not about all the issues that you need to be talking about and that affect supporters. So my one hope is that people take away that it has to be genuine dialogue with a supporters group on a number of issues, and then everybody gets the benefit that way. Both parties do.
Yeah, it's just so wide-ranging what you do, and really, really important, because it's like what you've been saying. I mean, fans have about been the lifeblood and of the whole community, around the game and further. And you've raised some really, really important points. I mean, for me, looking at it I look at things from a social perspective. Sociology perspective, I think there's so much there of real interest around, fans and community support. What we'll do, we make sure we get that survey tweeted out for you, Deb.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say thank you so much for bringing that really valuable insight to this discussion today. Because we talk about the games, we talk about the players, we talk about the coaching, but the fans, they have such a bit, and I love the way that you brought that, original thing in around 1921, because we're very much linking you know, the past to the present.
Yeah.
And in the past, it was a time of crisis. We're in the present, we're coming into a time of crisis with things what are going on, very different, but still a time of crisis. And I think the fans are so important to the women's game.
Yeah.
So thank you very, very much for that.
Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you, everybody. I know Kat's waving at us to pull it to a halt.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you.